All right, welcome to AEC Tech Conversations, a podcast episode where we're exploring not just the technology shaping construction, but the human side of how change actually happens as well. The construction industry doesn't struggle with a lack of ideas or available technology. What we often struggle with is adoption. New tools get introduced, pilots get launched, and then quietly we revert back to the familiar ways of working. This is how we've always done it. That won't work here. We don't have time to figure this out right now. Those statements usually sound practical, but underneath them is something else: pressure. Change introduces uncertainty, and for people already responsible for safety, schedules, budgets, and outcomes, that uncertainty creates extra risk. Most resistance to innovation in construction isn't really about the technology itself. It's about what the technology represents: a change to your identity, expertise, workflow, and control, layered on top of an already demanding environment. When that stress goes unrecognized, organizations don't stop innovating, they become cautious, adoption slows, and promising tools never reach their full potential. That's why this conversation matters. I'm Jeff Visnic. I'm an electrical engineer, and I've been in the construction industry for a little over 25 years. And I'm also a fearless living coach and trainer. And I'm joined today by Alex Ayers and Matthew Halveland from AEC TechCon to talk about what they're seeing across the industry and why understanding the human side of change may be the missing link between innovation and impact. So, Alex, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role in the conference?
Happily. Happy to be here, Jeff. As you said, I'm Alex Ayers. I work here in St. Louis at the Cordy Company, a general contractor and design builder. Been with Cordy for about 10 years now and currently hold the role of Director of Technology and Development. Pretty applicable to this conversation because that role is essentially half construction technology deployment and half workforce development initiatives. So definitely align with a lot of what TechCon represents. And of course, in addition, my day job, I volunteer with Matt to help lead the steering committee for AEC TechCon, about a 10 to 15 year running event, again, here in St. Louis, that shows where and how technology can transform the AEC industry. So this year, I'm vice chair in that planning effort and joined today, of course, by Matt Havlin, who I'll kick it to now for his intro.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having us. Yeah, I'm Matt Havlin. Been in the industry for over 20 years, and I'm currently at Newground as BIM manager. And as Alex said, we're both volunteers on the AEC TechCon. This year, I am chairing the 2026 conference. I've been a part of it for, over 10 years now. Been co-chair before in another version of it. But yeah, we've rebranded to AEC TechCon few years ago. And it's our new home for creating a community in the industry for people to come together, network, share their knowledge, and see where we can improve the industry going forward.
Having attended it the last 2 years, it's a great conference. If you're curious about what change is happening in the industry from a technology perspective or meeting other people who are leading that charge, it's a really good opportunity to connect with people and talk through new ideas. And I think we're in need of some new ideas, right, to make our lives easier.
Always the industry is always evolving, so it's a great way to stay on top of things, to hear what other people are doing.
Yeah, and in particular, TechCon tries to stay really user driven, where we've got actual end users, practicing in an AEC industry, sharing those ideas, sharing that knowledge, and hoping to receive the same from the group.
I probably should have said this when I introduced myself, but this year I'll be doing the opening keynote at the conference talking about this very topic. So I'm really excited to be doing that and hoping to build a little momentum with this, getting the conversation going early. So throw this first question out to both of you. So, from what you're seeing across the industry, how would you describe the current relationship between construction and technology?
I'll field that one first. I'd say cautiously optimistic. Maybe I'm spoiled by, of course, work at the Cordy company, which has got a lot of forward thinking people. But, I think there's sort of a trust and verify relationship with technology right now because there's just so much, so many apps, so much talk about AI, you name it, that sort of inundated project teams. I think project teams are willing to maybe give it a try, but they want that what they're willing to try out to be sort of vetted, by a layer in the organization. I'm lucky to serve that role at Cordy, but I think there's some trust building up where, if an organization has an individual who has sort of been in that construction technology world, but also spent time on job sites, they're maybe more willing to approach something, to try something, to consider something new that they may not otherwise have if vetted by that first layer in an organization. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I think, in having conversations with others in the industry, I think we're a little bit all over the place. Everybody's got a different circumstance, right? Where, some are definitely pushing the boundary, others are holding back and they're, you know, 10, 15 years behind everybody else, which isn't always a bad thing, but it's also not always a good thing, especially when it comes to the competitive nature of our industry, right? I think cautiously optimistic is probably, the right way to go. You don't want to be bleeding edge, but I think taking the cautious approach and doing your due diligence externally as well as internally is important. So that way the industry is making good decisions within their companies.
And if I may, as a actual example of exactly what Matt just described in terms of folks being all over the place, Corey's lucky to participate in a peer group. Our organization is with 5 or 6 others of similar size, roughly in the 300 million to $1.3 billion range. And as it relates to something like AI, which is a hot topic, that group really is all over the place. Some prohibit it entirely. Some are more sort of open book in that they want their folks to try it. So just demonstrate that point that those are all successful organizations, but really with one tool, if you will, AI, there's a large variety of where they're at in terms of adoption or willingness.
I still interview people who have been in the industry for a long time and don't have any experience with Revit, right? So they maybe work for a smaller engineering company and the engineering company just has made no attempt to come over and adopt Revit use. And so there's a big learning curve for those people when they step into some of the bigger companies who have been using it for a long time. So I think you guys are spot on that it's a little bit all over the place. And I think it's okay to, like Matt said, not be bleeding edge, but I think you can fall pretty far behind, especially with as rapidly as it's changing and progressing right now.
It's funny you brought up Revit. I started my Revit journey in 20, no, yeah, 2008. So it's just like, I've been using it since then and went through that period of like, okay, we'll use AutoCAD on this project, we'll use Revit on this project. And then finally I got to a point where like, we're done. We're not going back and forth anymore.
Yeah.
This is this isn't effective at all. So I was just having a conversation last week with somebody actually, and they're still using AutoCAD and they haven't moved. They're and they were like, "Well, our products aren't big enough." And it's just like, it's that mental aspect to it, to where you think, okay, Revit is a beast of a program, and my project is too small, and it's like, no, like, you know, you just need to jump in and do it. Get your feet wet. Don't be scared of it. Because where I started from with Revit, we were doing residential projects. So, like, as small as you can get, we were pushing it all through Revit. So it can be done.
Yeah, I just interviewed somebody last week who was doing high-rise buildings, high-rise multifamily type developments in Chicago, and they were all doing it in AutoCAD still, the whole electrical engineering piece of it. And I think, right, it's that we're all under a lot of pressure in the industry, right? Whether it be time pressure, budget pressure, whatever, right? And so this idea of trying something new adds to that level of pressure.
It does.
So when you guys see new technology introduced, what tends to influence how well it actually gets used?
Hmm. Want to field that one first, Matt?
I think whether, like, you know, the way I try to approach most of this is, sitting out to a small group, creating that success story first. That way, when we do roll it out to the larger group, that there's some buy-in, some excitement to try to get the rest of the gang on board. I've seen that as this a successful approach. I think where people get, afraid is the unknown, right? It's like, oh, there's this new thing, or they get overwhelmed because it's another thing I got to learn. I think trying to start small and then build up from there in terms of an implementation, rolling it out in phases really helps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree
Yes.
more. Whether it's at AEC TechCon, similar events put on by our conference partners, Autodesk, Procore, I'm always looking for an implementation session. It might be titled something different, adoption, implementation. If it's got that word in the title, I'm usually drawn to the session because it's usually its simplest form, sort of a phasing or piecemeal approach, like Matt is saying. But I just really like to hear real stories of how people have deployed that concept. Because ultimately, I think the short answer to the question is, I've heard the term champion used a lot. Matt's talking about a success story, a small team, but same concept. Like if I can get, a superintendent, even better if they're, say, a Cordy veteran, bought into an idea, and if that idea is actually helping them in their day to day, that is way more powerful to communicate that story, to other teams that haven't yet used the product, the workflow, et cetera, really more than any presentation or pitch that I could do or a vendor could do. So absolutely, I think it's got to happen in phases, and you got to sort of pick like where's the frontier of this implementation and how quickly is it being deployed? Is it this group of projects, this type of projects, the size of project, these individuals, what have you. But I've always found success in that by having a very strict phasing, strict rollout in that regard.
I always look at change and I always think of my son right now is learning how to drive. And I look at change adoption, right, as like, well, if I just like took him to the highway and cut him loose, we'd be in a lot of trouble, right? And we'd probably be injuring ourselves and other people as we go about it, right? So it's how do you get him comfortable in small steps so that at some point he can actually do all the things that you have to do when you're driving. And that's kind of how we've approached it. And most of us probably did that at some point in our life, and now driving is a very comfortable thing for us. So I think you're both spot on, right? The little steps to help move the ball forward.
And I love the analogy though. It's, contact people listening. It's like, what is your proverbial parking lot to practice in, and how does that map to your organization? Maybe make it sound a little bit more grand than the proverbial parking lot, but what is the practice round? What is the sandbox?
Yeah. Because we all want to get on the highway and drive, right? But if we're not prepared to do that, it's not going to go well. So Matt kind of mentioned this. What do you think? I mean, I think in the construction industry, this is the way we've always done it, is said so much. What do you think's kind of behind that, or why do people revert back to that way that we've always done things?
I think it's from a comfort level. People get comfortable. We're creatures of habit, right? So they've developed habits over the current practices that they've been doing for years. And so I think that's the part that you have to maybe not necessarily break, but modify and getting people comfortable that, okay, just like buildings and construction evolve over time, over the course of history, the methods of construction have changed. The way we design and create has to also evolve and change. So I think, trying to develop an adaptive habit is where you can really, be successful in evolving your practice or, just how you do things in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar take, maybe different take, similar message for sure. In that, whether it's our intern program or PEs or what have you, I'll sit through a lot of interviews, and the question always comes up like, "What do you love about construction?" Or "What do you love about architecture?" What have you. And I find often the variety is the answer to that question. The problems are different, the teams are different, et cetera. With Cordy, we work all over the country. And so the call it 20 to 30 subs we hire on a given job might be totally different. I mean, of course, there's go-to guys and gals that we'll partner with and hire, but I think folks want some consistency, even though they say they like the variety of the job. And so, whether it's a workflow or a process or a tool, having that consistency, despite the variety and objective or team, I think really helps folks not maybe be totally overwhelmed by construction as a job, given that you have, you know, this job is greenfield and has underground utility and permitting challenges. This job is brownfield and has existing conditions and tie-in and, you know, operating during construction challenges. And it's a little bit different flavor on every job. And so I think folks fall back on maybe the process or workflows that comprise their job as the comfort zone, knowing that the nature of the job can be so different project to project.
Kind of to what you were talking about, Alex, we're our industry is so schedule driven and, there's money behind all that, right? So we've got deadlines to meet. We've got, you know, other priorities that have to get taken care of. And that tends to drive those habits, that consistency that we want, because typically consistency is what provides our efficiency, right? So trying to balance all that is also an important factor. But, you know, reverting back to this is the way we've always done it, it's like, yeah, but, you know, we might be missing out on efficiencies that, we haven't explored yet with other tools, other processes, and workflows.
And if I may, Matt, something you said prompted me to think of favorite professor back in my CM days. Shout out Steve Bannis if he's listening. But he always liked to talk about how you're not prototyping a building. If you're building a software, you're building a V1, you can make adjustments in V1.1, you can make adjustments in V2, so on and so forth. But that's not really true in building. You have sort of a distinct V1 and nothing further. I mean, sure, you could argue an addition is a 1.1, but now we're into semantics. But ultimately, you have to nail it on the first try. And I think that maybe makes people hesitant as well. I mean, of course, we all are familiar with sort of the layers of quality control present in construction, but it does in some ways constrain, considering what you might do on the next one or considering how you might even adjust mid flight on this one. But yeah, can't prototype.
I've never done two buildings that were the same, even though I've been told lots of times I was going to do the exact same building.
Mm.
If the site's always different or there's always something different about each building that we do, even if they are very similar. I think you're getting into the human element of this, right? Which is you guys have hit on being comfortable, right? And wanting to deliver a good project and, our careers, our livelihoods ride on our ability to perform at work. And so there's a lot of risk to step outside of what we do know works, what we do know performs and try something new. I mean, I see this with new engineers all the time as they've worked their way up through their career, right? And now they have somebody underneath them that they're working with. It's really hard for them to let go when they know that this thing has worked for them all the time of their career and kind of let the new person find their own wings and find things that work. And so I think we're just kind of fighting that human nature a little bit too.
Yes, absolutely.
So Matt, you mentioned like schedules, budgets, right? So I know we're delivering projects that are bigger, faster than we ever probably have before from a design perspective. How do you guys think the expectations that are put on everybody in our industry has affected their ability to be open to change?
Mm. I've got maybe a specific anecdote from just the past week, maybe put some of my cards on the table of something that should have been thought out more. I'm fortunate to have a strong team of PEs I work with at Cordy, and occasionally I will try to sort of free agent their time for implementation ideas, for process change, for, hey, what have you seen on your job that could work differently that we should consider more broadly? And sort of inviting that group to be thinking about change in that way. And the other day, I sort of maybe too hastily threw sort of an AI or automation change at them, like, hey, I'm going to define a period of time. Maybe there's some cash rewards involved. Best idea that can be implemented broadly wins, But lo and behold, even putting sort of some gamification behind it, PEs still have a boatload of submittals, for example, that they need to get through as part of their job. And they will default towards that, as they should, because ultimately I'm really talking about, quote unquote, extra credit. But I think that despite the expectations, maybe to change or to improve, the default will always fall to whatever the job is in that moment. I mean, Corey even likes to say job's the boss, which I think is a great tagline. But in some cases, how do you better consider how the job balances with that sort of discretionary time that maybe is too often huddled into construction technology or VDC groups as opposed to more broadly spread out through an organization?
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of key things. So one is right, it's also human nature to default to what we know. And so if I'm being asked to do something that I don't know how to do, and I have all these other tasks that I know how to do, I'm automatically going to go towards the task that I know how to do just because I don't like how it makes me feel to not know how to do this new thing that I'm trying to do. And then I also think you touched on right time margin
Mm.
and how do we create time for people to try something new, right? You can have people attend a workshop, get really excited about it. But if we haven't thought about, right, how are you going to have an hour or two extra a week to practice this within everything else that you're already doing, it's going to fail, right? Because you're not going to, if it's going to be an hour or two above and beyond what you're already doing, it's going to be really hard for people to want to take that on.
I think there's a lot of companies out there that, they might say, yeah, like, we only expect you to be 80% billable, and then the other 20% can be office time or exploring other, of these, implementations or ideas and stuff. But, kind of when it comes down to it is whether or not, how true is that? Is leadership really sticking to that and making sure that people get that 20% in or not, pushing schedule? I think the other aspect is, I think I've heard quite a bit lately where, oh, I've got so many, so many meetings going on, whether they're virtual or in person. And then, how do I get my actual work done? So I think, Alex, I think you hit the nail on the head on like, getting that feedback or getting your internal communities together to talk about the good, bad, and the ugly of a project, to talk about, okay, how could we have done this better? How could we do, I think those conversations are very important, and they may be lacking in those conversations in terms of actually, making sure that those are our priority just as much as the everyday project.
And if I may, knowing that that answer of format, what is discretionary time versus billable? What is my task time versus implementation? AC TechCon can offer, many examples of that because quite frankly, I've asked that similar question to peers, to colleagues I've met throughout the years, and the answer is always a little different. There is really no one size fit all. So come on over to AC TechCon and get some answers.
Yeah, I read a great article a few months ago, and it talked about the difference between what a manager's schedule looks like and what a maker's schedule looks like, and how a maker, right, needs big chunks of uninterrupted time to work, right? Because they need to get into their creative flow. They need to be able to access that place where they can actually get a lot of stuff done. And managers, on the other hand, right, the expectation is that their time is chunked up more into like 15-minute chunks of time where they're in a lot more meetings, they're doing a little bit more directing. But I think in our industry, we treat everybody the same. And a lot of times, right, I'll have the doers actually sitting in meetings. And I think that's why a lot of people end up having to work at nights or on the weekends because that's the only time that you have uninterrupted time to actually get into that flow state. So I think that's something we probably need to pay a little closer attention to, right? Is what does it actually take to sit down and knock out a set of drawings or when you're in the field, right? Actually accomplish a task. That this idea that one person can do everything is, I think, gets us into trouble a lot.
Hmm. Yeah, it's missing on the team aspect, right?
Yeah.
There's no I on team. So if you're putting all that pressure onto one person, then I think you're gonna start seeing a degradation of performance.
Yeah. And that person's really not going to want to try anything new.
Right. I don't have time. It's not that this is the way we've always done it. It's just I don't have time.
Yeah.
You guys have teed it up too well, so I gotta plug it real quick. Of course, we're all kind of swirling around the theme of your keynote, Jeff, on opening day one, but opening day two specifically talks about org systems in AEC businesses and sort of offers a keynote caliber, in-depth look at one case study, one organization, Slantis, co-founded by Andy Robert, who sort of reconsidered that model and then grew a business from it. So consider that one option that could potentially answer this question of, how should I balance my maker versus manager functions of my company? And how should I align that with where I want my company to go? Because again, I think not just the keynote, but in some ways, anyone you talk to could answer or at least talk about that question.
I'm really excited to see that. For as creative as we all are at times, I fear we lack that when it comes to how we run our businesses.
Yeah.
So why does this feel like an important conversation, an important moment right now in construction to you
Well,
both?
kind of everything that we've been talking about today, I think we're I don't know if breaking point's the right word, but like there's so much happening these days, in terms of how fast technology has developed. And some of us are trying to keep up, Some of us are falling behind, some of us are staying on top of it. And, you know, where do you go to find, what everybody else's struggles are? And kind of to Alex's point that he's pushed out there a couple times, like, AEC Tech conferences like AEC TechCon are the type of places that you need to go to have those conversations with others in the industry to find out, how are you doing this? How are you getting by? And there's a sense of community in the industry where instead of holding on to your knowledge and thinking that it's giving you the competitive edge, you know, share that knowledge and help each other grow, because there might be also opportunities of teaming on projects. I've seen a lot of large construction companies now, like the Rams stadium in Las Vegas, McCarthy and Mortensen, I think it was. Two very large construction conglomerates came together and built that stadium. And there might have been some other ones that I'm not aware of, but I think we have to start thinking differently about our industry and what that looks like.
I would agree. I think when you're in that burned out, fearful state, right, your natural inclination is to isolate
Mhm.
and just put your head down and work. And that is about the worst possible thing you can do, right? We need community. As a species, right, we're very tribe centric. And so this ability to connect with people and share ideas and lean on each other in those tough times is really important to all of us.
Yeah, not like fully formed thought. So I'm gonna test this one out here and see what you guys think. But I really like this maker manager analogy, mostly just because I like alliteration. But one could argue we've all seen this graph of productivity over time that shows, say, construction and agriculture sort of grouped as not improving, and maybe agriculture even has us beat on a improvement over time basis. So it's a known problem. It's not a surprise that construction innovates slowly. But I wonder, everyone understands that our industry is likewise tight margin. We're not manufacturing or tech where we've got a 40, 50, 60% margin to play with, and by extension, fund a maker ecosystem that has large work blocks to improve our processes. So, in absence of that, why not sort of group source that, from a wider industry, in terms of why is this important? Why is this moment so important to be having these conversations? I mean, we've already talked about sort of the increasing demands of projects, but we also didn't really talk about the scale. I mean, Corey has not personally, dove into the data center market yet. We're considering it like everyone else, but I mean, some of these projects are $15 billion projects, but yet the ENR top contractors are what, 15 or $20 billion contractors? Like the scale is sort of mismatched with the segmentation of our industry. And so in some cases, we should pool, not formally, but sort of informally pool knowledge together to enable us to kind of all improve collectively. Because it's still the competitive edge is how well can you execute on the ideas that you've learned, because that ultimately is the biggest challenge. But at least in my career, the peer groups I participate in, the networks I have, I don't find it problematic, to sort of exchange things we've tried. It's not so much trade secret as in expended effort that I can sort of share in return for the same, and maybe not have to go through those tests either individually or have someone I employ go through those tests. I'm sort of sharing the effort informally in this maker manager breakdown. And I just think to emphasize that point and to grow that sentiment in our industry will always be useful, whether it's, like adoption of Revit or adoption of reality capture or AI or what have you. It's like, let's all try things. And hey, I tried this, but you tried that. We'll compare notes and go try our own things again. It's not that we're stealing, it's like you're informing. So that'd be kind of my take on it, and why I think maybe not super urgent, but is collectively, growing our knowledge, growing our industry skills.
I think that's a really good point. And
Yeah.
the demand on everybody outside of work too is seemingly ramped up as well, right? So all the more reason to lean on each other and try to help each other out. I think everybody can have some success, right? Instead of trying to hoard it all to yourselves.
And we can't, because I mean, if we have $15 billion projects and our revenue is less than that, it's like, how are we attacking that, or how are we bonding that, at a fundamental level,
Well, how much of what we consider intellectual property is really intellectual property? The tools are all the same no matter who's using it.
Yep.
Somebody might be using it more effectively than others, but, unless you're in the business of your company actually developing your own software or developing your own like, we're all using the same stuff. So, there's lessons to learn from each other and to share that knowledge.
That reminds me of a previous point or a point previous keynote speaker Phil Bernstein had made, maybe on 2 separate occasions, actually. He had sort of made the analogy of what we're talking about to flashing details in an architecture firm, and that every architecture firm arguably has the same 15 to 25 flashing details, but they're all, like, very protective over them, like, you keep money. But they're all the same, and so it sort of defeats the purpose. It's like maybe the, call out detail might be the same. The implementation in that particular material sandwich of a building might be unique, but let's not argue about the details. Let's, individually we can execute on the buildings we design, but let's not argue about who gets to own this flashing layer goes in front of this one, you know?
Right. It's like, did you actually invent a new product that's in there, that's in your detail that nobody else has knowledge of? Yeah.
And probably all came from one company anyways, was people had moved around and copied details, right?
Yeah, no kidding. At least in St. Louis, it's that way.
Yeah, I joined a engineering firm and we were working on 3 brand new schools at the same time, and all 3 were doing separate luminaire schedules for their projects, right? It's like, guys, like 80% of the lights in this school are the exact same. Why are all 3 of you sitting here doing the same thing when we could be having one person do it and share amongst the group? And we did schools all the time, so that, it just speeds things up. But
Yeah.
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 So how does the theme of the conference this year reflect what you guys are hearing from the industry?
Yeah, I'll, turn this plug a little bit towards you, Jeff, and talk about our keynotes. Matt and I are big fans of the sub-theme present in our keynotes, specifically an intentional pairing of thought leaders, you being one of those, Jeff, with case studies. And so I think that theme, while not, it doesn't have a conceptual narrative that we can talk about. It has more of a practical narrative where, yeah, we want to introduce you to some of these ideas, whether it be the human side of change, the stress and fear that accompanies that, in your case, Jeff, or the aforementioned organizational redesign in Andy Roberts' case. Okay, those are great. But then in the afternoon, let's also look at real construction and architecture projects where versions of these ideas are being deployed or have already been deployed. And so I would say, even though it's not sort of a long form conceptual theme I can describe, hopefully by virtue of offering both of those, our attendees know that we are serious both about offering ideas that can improve your organizations, but also demonstrative examples, you know, of building projects where they have been employed. And ideally, that sort of trickles down to really any session that you sit through where, we're very particular about, okay, we'll accept a vendor demonstrating their tools, but we'd like a user to be accompanying that vendor to actually show where those ideas or workflows were implemented on a job. And I would say more than anything, I think that's what makes AEC TechCon unique and really what we shoot for in all aspects of the event. What do you think, Matt?
Yep. Yep. And I think the only thing that to add, and we've talked a lot about the thought leadership, but I think you touched on it, but the afternoon case studies that we've got going on, and there's a lot to learn from there as well. To where like day one, we're talking about a huge project, the Theodore Roosevelt Library, and I think it's gonna be a really cool story of how they utilized old techniques in construction in a new way. And then day two, we've got more local case study to the St. Louis, to where they're going to be talking about the actual project team and how they use technology to successfully renovate historic building and convert it from one purpose to another. So I think we've got some really good content revolving around how things are changing and how to deal with change.
And to stick with the lovely alliteration from earlier, because I promise I'm stealing this analogy, but we're offering something both for the maker and the manager that hopefully inspires both of their work and gives them both something that they can take away and either implement how they manage people or projects or implement how they make. So I think we hopefully will address both come May 6th and 7th.
Yeah.
My last question for you both is, as you look ahead, what do you think leaders need to be paying attention to as technology does continue to evolve? Because it's evolving at an exponential rate, right? Way faster, and there's been way more growth than we've ever seen. And, I even heard somebody say, right, look at your credit card statement and how many things that you pay for now didn't exist 5 years ago. And it's a lot. A lot of your credit card statement is stuff that did not exist. So,
Yeah, I might get distracted from being able to answer this question, Jeff, but to that point, I tagged a YouTube video to my watch later process that was something along the lines of, why is owning nothing so expensive? To your point about all these subscriptions, et cetera. Yeah, it's a lot. But no, as I look ahead, I guess, Matt, you'll have to call me if this is a cop out answer or not. But I feel like leaders just can't look at technology in a vacuum. They sort of have to look at comprehensively what is the value that that technology is bringing to their organization and how well are their people leveraging it. Because I can go buy a drone and be excited about it and market that I have a drone, but unless I've developed a use case for it that somehow meets the sub goals of my mission, what am I doing? And so I really invite folks to not just look at what technology you have, but maybe how well it is aligned with running your projects. And if it feels like an afterthought or if it feels like effort, there's probably an issue there or there's probably an opportunity there to implement it better. That would be my take. But what do you think, man? Is that a cop out or?
I'm right there with you. I think you know, what's important from a leadership standpoint is that you need to look at the big picture, right? Because I think a lot of leaders get stuck in tunnel vision. So, you know, I'm responsible for my division of the company, and there's not enough conversations happening at the broader scale to where how are we doing it? What are we doing? What makes sense? I've attended a lot of sessions over the past few years of people talking about technology stacks, ecosystems, and I think that's not being talked about enough, probably in companies, to where, okay, let's look at everything that we have and what's connected, what's not connected. Where can we gain efficiencies? Where, you know, Jeff, you talked about spending, right? Like the cost of technology is only going to keep going up. So, how does that become sustainable? Because if we keep going after the new shinies and not looking at, okay, how does this fit within our process? Then you can start to run into trouble there as well. So I think the biggest thing is to make sure that the right people are as part of the conversation. And it's not just, I mean, we all want to make money, right? But how we do that, that has to be part of the conversation as well.
yeah, and I would challenge leaders to not forget the human side of this, right? Because if we do forget that part of it, right, our people are going to be fighting against us the whole way, no matter how good a new piece of technology is. And it's going to fail, right? Like people's brains are going to work against that the whole time. And so it's really important to consider that and have a plan of how to work with people's mentalities and that fear part of their brain instead of trying to fight against it.
Yep, 100%. Hmm.
Anything else to add, you two, or shall we wrap up?
Maybe an obvious thing to include, but if you're curious about these ideas and want to know more, please do join us here in the St. Louis area come May 6th and 7th. AEC TechCon will be on its third year under that name, and we'd love to have you as we continue to grow. If you want to know more, check out our website. It's tied directly to AGC in Missouri, so you can find us there.
May 6th and 7th.
Yeah, May 6th and 7th. It's a great conference. Having attended the last 2 years, I would definitely say it's money well spent.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me today, and we'll catch y'all next time for another conversation.
No doubt.